Alright, hey guys, this is going to be a little integers review to kind of review how to add and subtract numbers, multiply and divide numbers, all positive and negative numbers like these. Alright, so let's say I give you the problem -1 plus -2. Alright, and I want to know what the answer to that is. So there's a couple ways you could think about it. So I'm going to start at -1, and it says I'm going to add 2 more negatives. So I'm going to go backwards 2 spots, and that's going to put me at -3. Alright, another way to think about it is with our integer chips that we did last year. So think about I have 1 negative and then 2 more negatives. Okay, how many total negatives is it? 1, 2, 3. So my answer is -3. Alright, so the rule for adding integers, when you have 2 integers with the same sign, you just get to add them and keep that sign. Okay, so if I gave you -5 plus -2, you guys see how they're both negatives? 5 negatives, 2 more negatives. Then you get to put them all together, so that would just give you 7 negatives. So you just get to combine them, since they have the same sign. That's the same as if I said 5 plus 2. They're both positive, so you just get to put them together. You get 7. Okay, if I gave you -8 plus -1, those are both negatives, so you can combine them, and I would get -9. Alright, so if I am adding integers with the same sign, the rules are you keep the sign and you just add the numbers. So again, an example of that would be -4 plus -3. Okay, I see they both are negatives, so I just get to add them. I get 7, and then I keep the sign, -7. And again, think about it. I have 4 negatives, 3 more negatives. That's 7 total negatives. Okay, again, if I had -5 plus -4, okay, they're both negatives, so you can combine them because they're the same. And then you keep the sign, so it's -9. Okay, so now we're going to do adding integers with different signs. Okay, now since these are different, you can see that these are negatives and these are positives. You cannot combine them because they're not the same. What's really going to happen is they're going to cancel each other out. So I'm going to draw a little picture for it. So let's think. I got 4 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and 2 positives, 1, 2. Okay, I know from last year that if I put 1 negative and 1 positive together, they make 0. That's going to be cancel each other out. Again, 1 negative here and 1 positive, that makes a 0 pair. So think about, what do you have left? Well, it looks like I have 2 negatives left, so my answer is -2. Okay, let me draw another one. Let's do 3 plus -5. Okay, so I start with 3 positives, 1, 2, 3, and 5 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and I want to solve that. So I'm going to take 1 negative and 1 positive. Those are going to cancel each other out. A positive and a negative, those make 0. Positive and a negative makes 0. So what do I have left? Well, it looks like I have 2 negatives left, so the answer to that is -2. Alright, so when I'm doing these types of problems, here's what I kind of think. So if I gave you -10 plus 2, here's what I think, okay? So I know that they don't go together. They're going to cancel each other out. So I think, well, what do I have less of? Well, I only have 2 positives. So those 2 are going to cancel out with 2 of these. So if I take 2 of these away, you know, if I take 10, take away 2, that's going to leave me with just 8 negatives left. So there's my answer. So really, when you're doing this, you actually, when they're different signs, you actually find the difference, or you subtract. Okay? And then you keep the sign of the bigger number. So keep sign of the bigger number, and then that will give you the answer. Alright, so let's think about one more. What if I gave you -4 plus 7? Okay, I'm thinking about kind of canceling out. 4 of these negatives are going to cancel 4 of those. So if I take 4 of those away, I'm left with just 3 of those there, so 3 positives. So really all I did was do 7, take away 4, that's 3, and then I had more positives left, so it was a +3. Alright, so here are the rules for adding integers when you have different signs. Okay, so if you notice that one's positive, one's negative, and you're adding, okay, what you do is you actually find the difference, or do some canceling out, which is the same as subtracting, and then keep the sign of the bigger number. So here's an example. 20 plus -5. Okay, I can see they're different, so I can't combine them, because one's positive, one's negative. Alright, so I know that these 5 negatives are going to cancel 5 of those. So take 20, take away 5, so I'd still have 15 of those left. So my answer to this is +15. So again, basically I just subtracted those, and then there was more positives, so my answer is positive. Okay, here's another example. Negative 8 plus 6. Okay, so right away I know these 6 positives are going to cancel out 6 of these. So 8 take away 6 is 2, and I'm going to have more negatives left, so my answer is negative 2. Alright, so let's do a couple examples with subtracting integers. Now, I know you guys remember this from last year because we said it a lot of times. Whenever you see subtraction, so I see a subtraction symbol right here, I want you to always, always, always change it to addition. Okay, so I keep my first number, negative 8. I'm going to change that to addition. And you're going to, so I changed it to add, and then you go to the very next number, and you change it to the opposite. So the opposite of 2 is negative 2. Okay, so I just changed that. So I changed the subtraction to an adding, and I did the opposite of 2, which was negative 2. Now I can solve this. What's a negative 8 and then 2 more negatives? Well, they're the same sign, so I just get to put them together. I get negative 10. Okay, here's another example. If I said 4 minus negative 3. Okay, so I keep my first number. I see subtraction. I'm going to change it to add, and I'm going to do the opposite of negative 3, which is 3. So now look how easy this is. 4 plus 3 is 7. So there's my answer. Alright, so our rule for subtracting integers is you're always going to change it to addition by adding the opposite. So you want to write that down. So if I had negative 5 minus 4, okay, I see the subtraction sign. I'm going to change it to adding, and I come to 4, change it to the opposite, negative 4. So now negative 5 plus negative 4, that would give me negative 9. One more example. If I had 6 minus negative 2, okay, I'm going to change it to add, and I come and do the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2. Now it just says 6 plus 2, which is 8. All right, let's have you guys try a couple of subtracting integers problems. So let's say I have negative 5 minus 2 and negative 3 minus negative 5. Okay, so take a second to try those. Okay, so the first one, so let's see, it's subtraction, so I'm going to change it to add, and then the opposite of 2 is negative 2. Okay, so now when I look at that, I have negative 5 and negative 2. That gives me 7 negatives total. Okay, my second one, I see subtraction. I'm going to change it to add, and then the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. Okay, now let's look at it. Now it says negative 3 plus 5. Okay, I cannot combine those because some are negative, some are positive. So these 3 negatives are going to cancel out 3 of those positives. So if I take 3 away from there, I'm left with 2 positives. So there's my answer. All right, so multiplying and dividing integers, when you multiply and divide positive and negative numbers, there's its own set of rules. And last year we went over how it worked, so I'm just going to give you the rules so you have these in your notes. So anytime you have a negative times a negative, you should automatically know this is only for timesing and dividing. A negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, an example of that would be negative 3 times negative 2. A negative times a negative is a positive, and the answer is 6. Okay, when you have one of each sign, so let's say you have a negative times a positive, your answer is always going to be negative. All right, an example of that is negative 3 times positive 2. All right, I know 3 times 2 is 6, and I have one of each, so it's negative. And this, again, this is only for timesing and dividing. Okay, so my last one says I have a positive times a negative. So again, I have one of each, so my answer is going to be negative. And an example of that would be 4 times negative 2. Well, I know 4 times 2 is 8, and then it's going to be negative. Now, the rules are exactly the same for dividing. Okay, so just in general, kind of a little quick trick for this is when you have one of each, it's always going to be negative. And again, only for timesing and dividing. And if it's the same sign, it's going to be positive. Okay, so again, I'll just give you one dividing example. If I had 10 divided by negative 2, okay, I have one of each sign, so it's going to be negative. And then I know my answer is 5. 10 divided by 2 is 5, so it's negative 5. Okay, so those are my rules for multiplying and dividing integers. All right, we're going to do a little bit of a mixed practice. I'm going to give you a couple. So let's say I have negative 5 times 2 times 3. All right, so here's what I would do. When you're multiplying more than 2 numbers, just do 2 at a time. I'm going to do negative 5 times 2. Well, I know 5 times 2 is 10, and then let's think. I have one of each. When I'm timesing, I know my answer is negative. Okay, I'm done with those. Now I still have to times that by 3. Okay, so I know 10 times 3 is 30. And it looks like I have one negative and one positive, so my answer is negative. Those are your rules for timesing. Okay, now let's do a adding one. Let's say I have negative 5 plus negative 3. Okay, when you're adding integers, you have to think kind of putting together. So I have some negatives and some more negatives. If I combine those, I have lots of negatives. It looks like I have 8 of them, and I have 8 negatives total. So there's my answer. Okay, now if I had different signs, let's try one with different signs. Negative 10 plus 2. All right, so I have some negatives and some positives. I can't combine those, so I'm going to have to cancel out. Well, 2 positives are going to cancel 2 of these out. So 10 take away 2 is 8. So again, my answer is 8, and I had more negatives left, so my answer is negative 8. Okay, let's try another dividing one. How about 20? Negative 20 divided by negative 2. Okay, so I know 20 divided by 2 is 10, and then a negative divided by a negative is always a positive, so my answer is 10. Just a few more. Let's say I had 4 that I'm timesing. Let's do negative 2 times 3 times 4 times negative 2. All right, so what I would say is just multiply together 2 at a time. So let's do these 2 first. So negative 2 times 3. So think about it in your head. 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, if you have one of each when you're timesing, it's negative. Okay, I'm going to do these 2 together. 4 times 2 I know is 8. And a positive times a negative, when you have one of each, it's negative when you're timesing. So now I have negative 6 times negative 8. Okay, so now I'm going to think, well, 6 times 8, I know that's 48. And then what's a negative times a negative? It's a positive. So my answer is positive 48. So that's how you do it when there's more than one. Okay, and then last one, let's do a subtracting one. Let's say I had 5 minus negative 3. Okay, whenever you see subtraction, remember the rule. You always need to change subtraction to addition, so I'm going to change that to add, and then come to do the opposite of negative 3, which is positive 3. So now look at it. It says 5 plus 3, which is 8. All right, so now you're going to finish filling in your note sheet. It's a bunch of practice problems with adding and subtracting integers. Okay, so you're going to do that. If you finish that, then you are going to try some integer games on your iPad. Okay, and you can find these in Schoology.